Tēnā tātou katoa. We have opened with karakia, and I'm now going to introduce our kaupapa for today. So we are so delighted and privileged to have Odyssey House Christchurch presenting about the links between gambling and methamphetamine. So I have a little kōrero about Odyssey House in Christchurch. Odyssey House Trust Christchurch provides therapeutic support and education to clients with drug and alcohol addictions. Their mission is to improve the well-being, life quality of individuals, whānau and community affected by addiction, mental health and related issues. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to our guest for today, Julie Nelmes, who will be sharing her knowledge and experience in the area of methamphetamine. And so over to you, Julie. Tēnā koe. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, morena everybody. My name's Julie, as a lovely Pete just introduced me. I work for Odyssey House Trust, and I have been with Odyssey House Trust for 7 years. I work out of the community sector, and I have 2 hats, which I'll tell you guys about. I work out of Ferry Road in Christchurch, so we work solely in the community sector. I don't work in the residential sector, and the team that I work for is a Meth Help team. The Meth Help team was started because it was recognised that we needed specialised methamphetamine counsellors, case managers, and it was rolled out originally under the Alcohol Drug Helpline as a national telephone screening service. So we provide and case manage people who are ringing in wanting to make changes around their methamphetamine use. We also support family members who are addressing the fallout with a loved one's methamphetamine use, and I can tell you under COVID that was extremely challenging, working as a practitioner from home. We also offer Zoom to people nationally. I will speak a little bit about that later on because the cohort that we work with can be quite chaotic, and Zoom is not the best outreach platform for us. And I also work for the screening team here in under Odyssey House Trust with Christchurch Central Services. And so what that is Christchurch Central Services is probably the first of its kind in the South Island, where we are an initial entry point for all the AOD services here in Christchurch and in Canterbury. So people ring in, we take an initial phone screening, and from there we collaborate with the client who's ringing in, and then we will refer them to whatever service, whether it be residential through Salvation Army, whether it be detox through the City Mission, whether it be whaiora that runs out of our centre, which is an outpatient intensive treatment program. And we've just found that eliminates a lot of barriers to people having to ring a whole heap of services and getting nowhere. And one of the things that I'm really proud of that we do under the screening team is we screen for behavioural addictions, and gambling is certainly a behavioural addiction. So we'll screen for that. My other hat that I not so much working on the phones anymore, but it was really identified here in Christchurch and in Canterbury that we needed specialised AOD practitioners, case managing, advocating and working face to face with clients, specifically with methamphetamine. So that's what I do. Most of my work is face to face. Quarter of my work would be on the phones, and the rest of the time I work on the screening team. I've had my own lived journey with methamphetamine. I come from a family that has had huge dysfunction with comorbidity of mental health and addiction. And so I'm just really, really passionate about supporting people. My substance of choice was methamphetamine. I'm classed myself as being on a discovery journey, and I've been meth free now for over 15 years. So I think it's a very long time. But within my own family, I certainly see the ripple effect that are intergenerational. So I'm very passionate, not about just working with the person, but really working with family. Because addiction it doesn't work alone quite often when we're working alongside the client. So as much as I can, I really want to include family as much as I can with treatment. And so the way I work comes from a lived experience and a strength-based stance. Even though I am a clinical caseworker, I'm currently doing some postgrad study at the moment. We always seem to be studying, don't we? But I'm just really passionate about supporting people. And today, I guess I've been asked to talk about the links between gambling and meth. And I think I'll branch out a little bit because what I'm noticing working with meth and some of the impulsivity and some of the patterns around people's meth use. A lot of behavioural addictions really coincide with methamphetamine use. And all the research-based evidence to date shows that methamphetamine substance use disorder and behavioural gambling, methamphetamine more than any other substance, links in more strongly with gambling and other behavioural disorders. And they think that's due to the nature of pathways of meth, what it does to the brain, the impulsivity, the risky behaviour, and the correlation between dopamine, that reward pathway of the brain, and gambling really go hand in hand. So does online pornography and other behavioural addictions. But I thought for those who, and I don't want to preach to the converted, I'm not too sure how much you guys specifically know about methamphetamine. So with the lovely Petty's help, who's been helping me, I'm not great at sharing stuff on Zoom. It's not a platform I personally use a lot. So thank you, Petty. I'm going to share a very quick, just sort of little video clip on how methamphetamine gets into the brain and sort of how it what effect it has on brain and behaviour. So we'll have a look at that and then I'll start the talk, and hopefully Petty's given me a good demonstration. So hopefully, fingers crossed, everything goes as it should. And it's gone. Okay.
Share screen.
What was it? Whiteboard. Screen 2.
Fabulous. Yep, we can see it.
You can see it.
Mm-hmm.
So I should just be able to push. Okay, hold on. And can you see that, guys?
Wow, actually, it's still loading. Are you able to, go to the YouTube clip?
Is that it?
Oh, we can hear it.
Our brains are
Fabulous.
finely tuned machines. Inside, cells called neurons are constantly communicating to shape how we think.
Our screen is Julie.
Drop on their conversation.
We
These
can
are the
hear, but
ends
we
of
can't
two
see it.
neurons. The one on the right sends a message, and the one on the left receives it. At first, they look connected, but they are actually separated by a tiny space.
So I think it's
called
just
synapse,
going
where
to the
messages are
YouTube
relayed.
clip.
What we'll see next is how we normally experience pleasure. The sending neuron contains dopamine. the brain's
What
pleasure
I might
chemical.
do is just
When
stop
something
it
good
then.
happens to us,
Pause, rightio, and I'll go Zoom screen 1. Get rid of you. Okay. Zoom. Look, so now I'm losing you guys.
Yeah.
Stop share. Sorry about that, guys. I was really hoping that that would work, but I, for some reason, cannot sing. I've got my meth presentation. Why can I not share sound, optimize for video clip? So hold on a minute. I'll just try something else. Minimize this on the brain. Yeah, okay. I might just leave that, I think. Sorry about that, guys. I was really hoping that we would be able to share that, but we're not going to be able to. So that's just my lack of
Would you be able to send us the link and we can send it out to the participants to watch in their time?
Yeah. So it's coming up here. That you cannot see that, can you?
Yes, we can.
See it now.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I figured out what I did wrong. I'm humbly apologize, guys.
our brains are finely tuned machines. Inside, cells called neurons are constantly communicating to shape how we think, feel, and act. Let's eavesdrop on their conversation. These are the ends of two neurons. The one on the right sends a message, and the one on the left receives it. At first, they look connected, but they are actually separated by a tiny space called a synapse, where messages are relayed. What we'll see next is how we normally experience pleasure. The sending neuron contains dopamine, the brain's pleasure chemical. When something good happens to us, this feel-good chemical is released into the synapse, where it connects with receptors. There, dopamine activates the receiving neuron, which in turn conveys the message onto the next neuron, creating a chain reaction that produces pleasure. After the message is sent, dopamine is recycled by transporters to be reused. This conversation repeating itself again and again gives us the feeling of pleasure. How does meth change our brain? When we use meth, it enters the bloodstream and travels to the reward center of the brain, where it invades the sending neuron. Meth causes dopamine to unnaturally leak into the neuron, then spill into the synapse. Making matters worse, meth blocks the transporters, which recycle dopamine back into the sending neuron. This keeps levels abnormally high, overstimulating our brains. We feel a powerful wave of pleasure. The rush can last 8 to 12 hours from just one dose. Meth causes dopamine to flood our receptors. When we stay up, taking more and more meth, we exhaust our dopamine supply. When the regular dose doesn't give us the same rush, we take more. But now when meth reaches the brain, it finds a lot less dopamine. Plus, meth has destroyed transporters. And on the receiving neuron, all that overstimulation we loved has caused receptors to withdraw. So it's just harder to get high. No matter how much meth we use, we can never recapture that first rush.
Thank you, Julie.
Okay, oh good. So oh, hold on. Right. That's it. I think I'm getting this whole Zoom thing. Right. So look, thank you everybody. So I guess the correlation and why I wanted to show you that video is because when clients typically present, they're at the stage where they're being using for quite some time, and that reward circuit pleasure pathway in the brain has been quite corrupted by the time I see people. So quite often people are feeling really flat, they're quite irritable, they're starting to have relationship issues, work issues, sometimes legal issues, sometimes issues with Oranga tamariki, or their tolerance to meth is increasing. And they're just not getting the good things that they used to get from meth anymore. And I think that video clearly correlates how that happens in really simple terms. And I think if we think of gambling, we know that, and you know, all the people from Problem Gambling Foundation will know that pokie machines have been designed by top-notch psychologists, and they really work on the same kind of reward pathways of the brain. And people can sit at a pokie machine for hours and hours and hours, and it's not actually the act of winning money that's the pleasurable reward. In fact, when I work with clients that are experiencing both meth use and gambling, they'll actually say if they do win, they feel really, really flat because they've had that big hit of dopamine, and then and I think, why do they keep putting the money back into the pokie machine? But it's actual the pushing the button, releasing, getting those wee hit of dopamine. That's what they're kind of chasing. And so how do we look around to see what kind of research there is that correlates methamphetamine use and gambling? And to date, there's not a lot of research because apparently it's quite hard to get a cohort of just straight people who are using methamphetamine who are also pathological gamblers. But the latest research to date that I could find that came out of Yale University, that was recognised by Yale University, actually came out of a residential maltreatment centre in Shanghai. And it's sort of backed up earlier evidence-based treatment that looked at the correlation between substance use and methamphetamine and gambling, and recognise that there is a higher proportion of people that are using methamphetamine will have the comorbidity of gambling as opposed to any other substance. And it comes down to what we as clinicians will know, that quite often when people have been abusing methamphetamine for a long time, they have poor impulse control, are more likely to put themselves into risky behaviours, do things without thinking, have a lower boredom threshold. And if we think of pokie machines, they're kind of like, they're just a perfect vehicle, aren't they? Quite often people can sit there, hours and hours go by, and it's just really feeding and rewarding that overstimulated brain. When I talk to clients, one of the first things I will do is assess for behavioural issues, because quite often with meth use there is I find that most, not all, but the statistics I have to date when I've tracked back from our records are around that 30% of the people that I work with who have a methamphetamine substance use disorder will have a behavioural addiction, the top two being gambling and pornography. Yeah, so that they will be the two. I will quite often refer to the Problem Gambling Foundation if people do pose with methamphetamine use and a gambling disorder or behavioural addiction. But I think the main thing that frustrates me as a clinician is because when we are assessing clients that come into our services on a clinical level, we will screen for mental health disorders, we will screen for substance use disorder, but I still don't think we're very good at screening for behavioural disorders. And if I'm working with a client and they have you know, that clearly they're coming to see me because we're a specialised meth service, one of the first questions that I'll also ask them will be around behavioural addictions. Because what happens when I'm working with a client who might just present on their own with a meth addiction, and there's no behavioural addiction, that's way easier for me as a clinician to then treat and respond with, because then I'm just working with the meth addiction. If I haven't asked or screened for behavioural addictions, such as either gambling or online pornography, or with males having sex with other males, Rewired's is a really good resource. That may be pee and play, where people are using methamphetamine to re-enhance sexual experiences, and that can happen in both heterosexual world as well. So when we look at just straight meth use, where people are using that initially to gain extra energy, work productivity, enhance mood because they might have anxiety or depression, then I can really work with that and just really work alongside them with harm reduction and motivation for them to start addressing what they want to do with their meth use disorder. It gets a lot trickier when I'm working along somebody who has a behavioural disorder as well, because in effect, what clients feedback to me and what I've observed is, in effect, we have the methamphetamine here, then we'll have the behavioural addiction, and when we put the two together, they actually kind of create a super high. And if I'm not working along with the behavioural addiction and I've missed that completely, then I'm doing all of my treatment-based plans around methamphetamine, and I'm not looking at the other risks. I'm not looking at the obvious risk that if we're putting in a plan to help mitigate, reduce, stop meth use, but I haven't screened for gambling, and Johnny goes into the pub and sits on a pokey machine because he's got a behavioural addiction, then within 10 minutes, he's more than likely texting his dealer and he's getting some meth, because for him, the two go together. Sort of, and quite often, and I'd really like your guys' feedback too, what you notice when you're working with clients that present both with meth addiction and a behavioural addiction. Because one will feed the other. It's just a really, really vicious circle. So I'm not addressing one addiction. I've got to look at, first of all, and this is where I'll refer to Problem Gambling Foundation, is a behavioural addiction primary? Is that first for them? And does the meth addiction sit under that as a secondary condition? Are they both equally as important to the client? Would this client only ever gamble if they're using meth? And if that's the case, then I will work alongside them. But it's really good to have that other support and to let them know that there is support for gambling as well. And they might want to address that secondarily, you know, for them, first and foremost, it might be meth. So we do know that there's a really strong correlation between meth use and behavioural addictions. And I think it needs to be looked at and addressed and assessed for a lot more. And I think a lot of times it's really missed. The other, I guess, more recent significant trend that I'm finding is we're starting to get a lot more younger and younger people that are using meth, even though their use would be more on an abuse scale. The behavioural addictions quite often are primary, not secondary. And the young ones that I speak to, they don't want to go sit in the pokies with the old people. That's what old people do. So a lot more of them are using their phones, their computers, and they'll be online gambling at home, or they'll be viewing a lot more pornographic content at home, and they've really married the two addictions together. So the meth use then with the online gambling and using devices, if we think that methamphetamine, other than any other stimulant, especially for our young people that have got very little tolerance, can release a 10 to 12 hour high, and devices run 24/7. Gambling on phones is 24/7. Pornography on phones is 24/7. I've had young ones and older clients that used to go to pokies that now would prefer to sit at home in the comfort of their own home. They're awake late at night, they're really overstimulated, and they'll be online gambling for hours. Quite often I might hear anecdotally from clients that they think they've been online gambling for, I don't know, 40 minutes, and 5 hours have gone past as they're consuming meth and gambling or viewing online pornography content. So I guess one of the things that is a little bit more complex, if I'm working alongside a client, I work in the space of harm reduction. When we have a behavioural addiction that sits alongside a substance use disorder such as methamphetamine, I'm not saying that harm reduction isn't a plan that I will work with people, but quite often the biggest changes are when I'm working alongside a client in a person-centred capacity, and they have their own epiphany that when it comes to those behavioural addictions, that abstinence is the only way. So not only are they looking at to reduce harm with their meth use, but for them to stop their meth use and or their gambling, or let's just say it's online pornography, it's really, really hard, because for them, it might be abstaining from sex, stopping their meth use and abstaining from sex. So they're kind of in a way needing to detox and take a break from both. And it's the same with online gambling. And I think that's a really big ask of clients. And so when I'm working in a face-to-face capacity with people that have both behavioural and meth addiction, I don't find that brief intervention works as well. In fact, I don't find that brief intervention with methamphetamine use works as well. I work with people long time. Methamphetamine is a chronic relapsing condition. We know by its very nature that it has a 2-year protracted withdrawal, which means it can take up to 2 years, like the video clip that we first saw, for the neuron pathways in the brain to reform, for those synapses to refire up, or that dopaminergic pathway, for those neuron pathways in the brain to find new healthy neuron pathways. And in that time, the risk of relapse is really, really high. So not only are clients working, their brains are working to heal and repair the damage done by methamphetamine, and struggling and dealing with the cravings and the urges of wanting to use meth, but at the same time they've got devices that we need every day for work purposes, that we carry around our laptops for work, that also have 24 access to gambling. So I really think where brief intervention has a space, and I love brief intervention work. I've worked as a brief intervention counsellor. I quite often will work with clients for up to 2 years, even though a bulk of my work may be done in a short period as people are reaffirming and they get past that 12 weeks with no use of meth, or for some people it's a healthy reduction plan where they might decide to use 4 or 5 times a year, but they have access to ongoing treatment for at least 2 years, and sometimes it can be a lot easier if they've got the same case manager, but we know that I guess in a lot of places that we work, that's just not possible. Yeah, so those would be some of the things that I've really observed working alongside behavioural issues and working alongside methamphetamine. And for a lot of my clients, there is so much stigma and shame around meth use, and sometimes I might be working with somebody for 6 months or 12 weeks, or till it takes a wee while to build up rapport and trust before then they'll be open about a behavioural issue that's sitting alongside their meth use. So even if we do screen for that, clients may not disclose that initially, because then there's an added level of stigma and shame with another addiction that's just as harmful. Hence why I think working with family members is really important. If I can get a client's permission to speak to a wife, to speak to a sister, to speak to parents, if they're open and honest with that, and sometimes that trust can take a wee while to build up, then I can get a really bigger picture for what's going on with the client. And I think that's not something that's easy to do if we're working with people in a brief intervention space. Yeah, so I guess those are the things that predominantly I'll notice. I think the other current trends that I'm really identifying is that there is a heck of a lot more IV use coming through than what there was 10 years ago. I'm also working with a lot of older clients now that have been using meth for 20 to 30 years. 4 of my face-to-face clients are ranging in ages from 55 to 69. 3 of those are IV users that had never used IV use before, and have only started using intravenously in the last year. They're not administering intravenously themselves. They're being administered, their IV use is being administered by people who they have been purchasing meth off for a long time and they really trust. They don't trust themselves to administer methamphetamine, but they're just finding that that hit is really good. And out of 2 of those clients, it's been driven by sexual dysfunction that could have been brought on by their meth use. And IV is just changing the game for them, especially if they've got younger partners. I think there's a lot more IV use coming through in the pee and play community with males having sex with other males. And the Burn It Foundation is fantastic. They have a online group and an app that they're developing specifically for that community. And I think the other new trend I'm noticing is causal with the cost of living crisis. I'm working a lot with men that run their own businesses that are having chemo treatment, that have used meth recreationally in the past. But they've managed to keep it there. It's been more of a party drug. They've never suffered from dependency. They're really high functioning people. For example, one male who, we'll just call him Bill, who has 20 tradies underneath him, had a diagnosis of cancer, needed to have chemo. He has 3 children and a mortgage and a business and simply couldn't afford to have time away from work. And so he used meth to counter the effects of chemotherapy so that he could maintain his employment. And that's becoming more normal. Meth's a performance enhancing drug, it's a stimulant. So he knows that he's starting his counselling now. He by no means is wanting to stop his meth use at this stage. So I'm working alongside him with a harm reduction plan for when he finishes his treatment. It's not a terminal diagnosis. And I'm really encouraging him to work alongside his GP. I'm not a GP. I have no idea how that will affect his outcomes. And I'm hoping that once we establish a bit more trust, that I'll have permission to liaise with his doctor. But at this stage, I work in a person-centred. If I was to disclose this to medical practitioners and GPs, I just wouldn't have anybody accessing our service. So those, I guess, some of the complexities and some of the different trends that I'm seeing. That I wasn't seeing before. And certainly, I think moving forward, there's going to be a lot more older consumers coming through, and not necessarily older consumers who have used methamphetamine previously. As methamphetamine becomes more normalised in society, I thought the cohort of older clients I'd be supporting would be clients who have had a long history with meth. Currently, most of the older clients that I'm supporting have used ecstasy recreationally, hallucinogens, I've used a bit of speed, but predominantly most of them that are in their 60s have only recently tried meth, which is astounding me as a person of lived experience, why somebody would choose to use meth in their 60s, or they're retired, they're bored, they've been curious about meth, and they're using meth because they're feeling older and tired, and the stimulant's been really great for them, until it obviously isn't great, and they're presenting with psychotic symptoms quite quickly. And I'm also working with clients who have Parkinson's at the moment as well, and I am working in conjunction with their doctors around that. So just a whole host of new clients are coming through that I never would have envisioned 10 years ago when I first started working just solely on the phones with the alcohol drug helpline. So yes, I think those would be certainly be the trends that I'm noticing, and a lot more professional people using meth. I think the Helen Clark Foundation put out a really good resource, and if I've got all your guys' emails, and it was done in conjunction with the Drug Foundation, and it's a really, really good resource. Who uses methamphetamine and why? And part of her recommendation was, and Hene Elder, some amazing people have contributed to this body of work. Unfortunately, it's recommendations, it's not policies that our politicians have to pick up. But they looked at some research in Canada where during COVID, Canada's amazing actually, they're pretty progressive in response to that real acute percentile of people suffering from either opioid addiction or meth addiction. And during COVID, to reduce harms to communities with violence, with crime, they actually introduced and piloted, I think it might be one of the first in the world, a very similar to opioid substitution treatment program, a mixodexidrine treatment program in Canada, where acute clients were offered through GPs prescribed methamphetamines. It was a very small control group, and unfortunately doctors were only able to prescribe a very low dose amphetamine, but the results of the pilot were pretty positive. And so I guess my future hope is in a harm reduction stance, that maybe that might get rolled out and New Zealand might become less conservative, and for our really acute methamphetamine users may have an option where, like the opioid substitution program that is, you know, run really well here in New Zealand, may have the opportunity to be able to be medically prescribed amphetamines at a higher level, which will stabilise them. I think that could really reduce a lot of crime and a lot of harm in New Zealand here for that really, 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 you know, acute 1% of the 1% of clients presenting with methamphetamine use. It's a person with lived experience. That's just my value on it. I know that could certainly ruffle feathers with a lot of people in Parliament. But, you know, my belief is certainly if we could start looking at addiction, like all of you guys would be the same as a health initiative instead of a punitive approach, it would be a lot better. And again, a lot of the results of the study came out that, again, Māori are disproportionately represented with methamphetamine use. The wastewater results show that Waikato and Northland, the results are that the population there are 30% more likely to be abusing methamphetamine. So that's huge. And we already know that when we're working alongside our Māori clients, that their rates of incarceration, that their rates of mental health, that their rates of health are already lower, and that you know, our Māori clients are more likely to be incarcerated and penalised more severely than our non-Māori clients. So I still think there's a heck of a lot of work that needs to be done destigmatising and demystifying meth abuse in New Zealand. And certainly when we're looking at working alongside our Māori clients as well, because they are luckily to receive way higher penalties through the courts, and to be marginalised and treated a lot differently. I know that there have been new initiatives in Northland that have been rolled out to try and address that, but still the rates of meth use in Northland and Waikato, due to the last water wasting treatment statistics, are significantly higher in those areas. So meth isn't going away anytime, anywhere soon. According to the last stats, currently 1.2% of the population that came out through the Drug Foundation, and the last stats I could get were at the end of last year, is 1.2, and that's about 45,000 New Zealanders. But I don't know what you guys think, but I think that's really disproportionately unrepresented. I never accessed treatment. Most of my family who've struggled with methamphetamine have never accessed treatment. Most of the people I know who've had lived experience won't pose to a service, especially women. There's such a huge fear of women losing their children, and I really don't think Oranga tamariki and New Zealand policies are doing a lot to help that. And that was certainly a barrier for me accessing treatment, was the risk of losing my children. And if I had, I don't know if I'd be sitting here today, quite frankly. The family courts is quite punitive with parents that are using methamphetamine. And I acknowledge that there are risks of harm to children through neglect. But methamphetamine tends to be dealt with totally different as opposed to alcohol, and yet alcohol is still the most harmful substance that we have here in New Zealand. I don't know what the answers are. It's really complex. I know that our service is really short-staffed at the moment. We're struggling to get practitioners who even want to work solely with clients presenting with methamphetamine. So that's kind of indicative to, I think, a lot of the struggles that our clients face. Yeah. So I think methamphetamine in New Zealand is really, really under disproportionately understood, because I think most people aren't accessing services. Most people can stop methamphetamine on its own. The hard part staying stopped. So it's extremely challenging for people to remain stopped for methamphetamine. Our service piloted a group a couple of years ago where we thought we'd have a specific group for meth users. I don't think, but we found here in Christchurch, we were funded through the DHB to pilot. We piloted a group purely for methamphetamine users, but our cohort was just too chaotic. It was really hard when we had some people who were wanting harm minimisation and others that needed total abstinence. So our group disbanded within a year. And I do a lot of group facilitation work, and in my personal experience, have found that when you've got a blend of meth users, alcohol, cannabis, a wide range of people with different substance use disorders, that seems to be a better fit for groups. Yeah, but certainly even in a group, if somebody is using methamphetamine, they can be quite chaotic and disruptive. I guess it's unless they're starting to maintain some sort of abstinence. And then when I work therapeutically with people, I will work therapeutically with somebody who's used for 20 years, who's still using, and that can be challenging work in the beginning. So, and I'd say, look, I'd really like to hear your guys' experiences when you're working with clients who are presenting with meth issues as well, and what you've experienced, and how you sort of screen for those behavioural addictions that run alongside people with meth use. So, yeah. Look, thank you. I feel like I've rabbited on enough. That's me. So, look,
Thank you, Julie. The floor is open, team. If anybody has any questions or any comments, any feedback for Julie.
Can I be the first to say that was freaking awesome? Thank you so much, Julie. There was such a lot of really cool information, so well said too. I really appreciate you sharing your years of experience and the struggles, and that was just so good. I got pages and notes here, so yeah, that was cool. And I look forward to seeing the rest of that video if we can get that link, because that's the best one. I mean, yeah, when you do your studies, they talk about synapses and things that go across, and you got these really bad photos, but that was a very good video. I was kind of getting it. So that was so cool. Thank you very much, Julie.
Hey, look, you're welcome. And I'm the same. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm an addictions counsellor from the hood. I still live in the hood here in Christchurch, and I left school at 15, and study has not been the easiest thing for me. I'm now doing some postgrad, but it's been a journey to get there. And so when I first looked at resources, it was went over my head. So I also try to find resources that can be really user-friendly for clients as well, or family members. So if you like, Bryony, I'll send you through a clip, because I think I'll get everybody's emails. I've also really good YouTube clips to give to family members that are struggling, that don't understand what's going on with a loved one, and that can be really frustrating. I'm working with a lot of nannies that are looking after bubs at the moment, heaps of nannies and granddads. And they just don't simply understand what's happening with their loved one, even though when I'm working with the nannies and the granddads or the sisters or the uncles, and a lot of them come from families where their addictions just been fragmentally intergenerational. Predominantly it's been alcohol. So if you like, I'll send you through some really good links that you can then pass on to family members as well. And I also want to, one thing I didn't mention is our beautiful Samoan community and the barriers. I do not work with a lot of Samoan clients simply because of the stigma and the shame around meth use. And I think there needs to be a lot more work done in that space too. Especially when we think of how important Christian values are for our Samoan community and the church. When I have worked with a lot of Samoan clients, there's so much shame. There's so much shame, and it really conflicts with your spiritual values. So I always try and plug into other people that are going to be able to support them better than middle-aged white women. But it's really challenging too. So just acknowledging too what we can do as practitioners and what we're not able to help and support people with. So I think there's still a lot of work. So any advice that any of our beautiful Samoan clinicians might have for us that might help and aid my practice, you've got my phone number, my email, please too send that through, or any links to any good services that is specifically working with people with meth. It'll be really beneficial for me too, because there's just so little resources out there for our PI communities. So I'm always interested to have good feedback too.
Julie, I was wondering, how, I've been reading a bit of Gabor Mate stuff recently. I'm wondering how much of your time in working with people is being spent on sort of like practical harm reduction plans, and how much time gets spent on, I guess, addressing the maybe cause root of pain in people's lives?
Underlying.
Yeah, I guess a good question. Hierarchy of needs is first. I can't speak for other services, but I'm person-centered. So I always do hierarchy of needs. There's no point to me working along somebody who's struggling with meth if they haven't got a home, if they're living in a car. So that would be, so I'm really lucky here. I can work alongside Salvation Army Comcare. So first of all, it might just be addressing housing needs or psychosis. I've had a lot of clients that are coming in that their parents are bringing in or a loved one's bringing in, and they're really psychotic. So they've been referred through crisis resolution. They've been in respite care. And so first of all, it might just be like really working alongside a GP and finding a plan it might just be mood stabilisation at the start, and they may not want to initially stop their meth use. So I think it's that hierarchy of needs that you're talking about. When it comes to trauma, your trauma is huge in our clients. So I'll sit alongside them with your trauma. I had a client yesterday, we'll call her Mary. I'd worked with her on and off for a year. We're a walk-in centre, so we're a community-based centre. She came in tears. Her uncle, who was her sexual abuser, passed, and her mother was angry with her for not wanting to go to the funeral. And yesterday, she just wanted to pick up. So even though I won't work in that ACC space, she just wanted to come in and have a cuppa and a cry. And we went for a walk down to the river, and we just did some smart planning around that. So I'll work in that space. But I think that's why we're quite fortunate here in Christchurch, because I have connections that I've built up over the years, because I've been doing this gig now for 8 years. So just through doing that and client feedback, I also have made some links with some really good ACC counsellors, and I know some are more specialised when it comes to substance use disorders, so that sit alongside trauma. And I have a lot of clients, and we're really lucky here. We have the men's centre. Sitting alongside the men's centre is also male survivors of sexual abuse that are peer support workers. And I don't know many people who've had a really substantial history of sexual abuse or trauma that don't have either a mental health comorbidity or a substance use. So a lot of my male clients, I can really refer them to the men's centre, and specifically to the peer support workers. I cannot validate peer support enough. You know, sometimes with treatment, you just want somebody who you can relate to, that's had that experience, whatever that may be, whatever that trauma is. So I think probably Christchurch is pretty lucky because we're a small community. So, you know, whereas Auckland it may be harder, or in Northland where there's less services, or down in Gore where there's even less again, where, look, I just really encourage clinicians to, I like to face-to-face, so I'll go to services and, you know, I'll be that smart ass that turns up at a service and introduces myself, because I like to know who I'm referring people to, and I don't know what I don't know. So, you know, part of, I feel my role as a clinician is to go around and meet other services and go, hey, you know, what do you do? How can you help? Yeah. So I agree with you. Trauma-informed work and substance use disorders and mental health, they go together. So it's I guess working alongside that is so much a part of our job. That's why I think, well, why brief intervention has its space, and it's a great space with clients that have got presenting with big comorbidity. You know, that's long-term work. That's not, in my experience, I can only speak for myself, that's not short-term work. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks to the team from Oasis Salvation Army and Masterton. Question from David.
Yeah. So I'm still in school, and it's still coming through that, you know, like there's not a lot of knowledge or lived experience, especially not lived experience in my cohort coming through. We started with 100 people. We're down to about 40 in our third year. And I'm the only person who has any experience with meth. There's a few that have experience with their family members with meth, but, you know, and there's a lot of fear around it. So thank you for building on that, you know, spreading the knowledge. That's really huge, because, yeah, like you say, people aren't that willing to engage with methamphetamine, and that's sad, because it's failing the community. It is much bigger than we realize, than the statistics show. So one thing that I wanted to ask was about ADHD, ADD, and those kind of disorders that, whether they're diagnosed or not, you know, what have you noticed as far as your clients in regards to that? Like, is it a high percentage comorbidity or?
Definitely. Really good question. Yeah, no, look, it definitely is. I was actually sent some research-based evidence, which David, I'll have your email, I'll pass on to you, by one of my professors. And I guess one of the things is that I think a lot of the clients that I see, because of their age, never had an ADHD diagnosis when they're young. The other barrier is it's extremely expensive, and it's really hard to get an adult diagnosis of ADHD. So yeah. I mean, I can remember in my lived experience, I was really young and mates around me were experimenting with Ritalin, for example, and I did it, and it was like they were buzzy for hours. I got about a 10-minute hit, and it was like, oh, this didn't do anything for me, you know. And then when I disclosed that to a doctor, he said, well, there's more than likely you've got ADHD. So I think a large cohort of people who are attracted to methamphetamine probably have a coexisting disorder that's been undiagnosed. The trouble therein lies that then if they go on and they are being medicated for ADHD, what I notice is quite often they might stop their ADHD medication. And because methamphetamine's temporarily making them feel great, this is the way I should have felt my whole life, sort of deal, until they end up quite psychotic or unwell, or all the other negative impacts. Then they go back to their doctor. They might go through a detox through a service or have a comp assessment done. And then even though the Health and Disability Commissioner says we cannot deprive anybody of ADHD medication, and quite often I'm finding a lot of clients are then being denied being re-prescribed ADHD medication, and henceforth they relapse. So I think there's also a lot of work to be done in that area as well. It's just so complex, and it can just depend on your relationship with your GP, whether or not you've accessed treatment. It's just not a one size fits all.
So I've got a personal story for this one. I went along as a support person for my partner to medication reassessment because she's recently been diagnosed with ADD.
Yep.
And saying that the long-acting Ritalin was really playing havoc with her. She's epileptic as well, so it's the mix of the two. She's got broken teeth from clenching. No history of methamphetamine at all, and she's like, look, the long acting is not working, can we try either the short acting, or after watching one of Gabor's things, because he was not diagnosed, but he's on Dexedrine now. So I was like, and he said that the Dexedrine was far better for him than the Ritalin. So I said, well, maybe something else, either Dexedrine or something else. Oh no, we don't do that. We don't do that in New Zealand.
Was she being told that she was a drug seeker? I'm finding that quite a few of my clients, they prefer the Dexies. But because it's just a lot more clarity, it activates in a more stimulant type way. There is more risk of people building up tolerance to them. So I think doctors, but there are really good online psychiatrists that people can access that understand the implications more. In fact, we know that people who have ADHD are 30 times more likely to commit suicide, 30 times more likely to present an A&E through risky behaviour. But I think GPs are quite afraid to prescribe, I'll just say Dexies because I always struggle with the long-term big clinical names, Dexies, than what perhaps a psychiatrist is. And I spoke with a psychiatrist here, and he sent me through some really valuable information. So perhaps could she get an online referral with a psychiatrist and see if the Dexies all work better for you? A lot of my clients say that for them that long acting Ritalin doesn't give them the clarity, especially a lot of my men that are working with heavy machinery or are professional when doing jobs which require a lot of concentration.
And they can't shut off either, so then they get prescribed Zopiclone as well. So because you don't need to be still humming at the end of the day.
Nope.
That whole experience was just straight unsafe. And I brought that up in the session got personally attacked, which was cool because I like a fight. But yeah, our complaint got upheld and she's got a different person now who is a lot more helpful. But it highlights a lack of understanding even among professionals who should have a really good understanding. But yeah, it's there's a lot of concern there. Thank you though. Thank you for your mahi, and I look forward to getting as much information from you as possible.
Yeah, it's a tough one for our client base, you know, because our client base can be really judged for being drug seeking, and your partner clearly wasn't. So that just highlights again that, you know, here she was who had no history with substance use disorder at all. And I think it's just another barrier for people, isn't it? You know. Yeah, and I know that it's just really, really hard to get a diagnosis for ADD here in New Zealand, even if you're a child. So good on her for being proactive, and you know, hopefully she can share her story with others. And good on you for knowing your rights under health and disability. I always say that to my clients: a doctor cannot deny you ADD or ADHD medication if you have had a past substance use disorder. It's actually against the law.
Awesome. Thanks, David. We did have a question that came through this morning, but I'm going to give the last question to Denise because she's been waiting, and maybe I'll just email you, Julie, later with the question. But yeah, over to you, Denise.
Kia ora. Thanks, Julie. That was great. I'll make it really quick. One of the things I thought was really interesting that you said is that pokies are designed for meth users, and I can't tell you the amount of meth users that say that. I think too, a real concern is for us in the gambling sector is that because of the late opening pokie venues, anyone up on meth will sit and play the pokies and never be approached. And that's a real concern, because I can understand it probably doesn't feel that safe. An agitated gambler is one thing, but an agitated meth user who's gambling is another level again. So I get that, but I feel like that's something we need to raise more within the gambling harm community, because it is huge. You know, when gamblers call us on our duty line and when they say, oh, there's a bit of drug use, and I just say to them, are we talking about meth? And they're like, yep. You know, so it's always a part of the conversations when we first check in with them, and it does go hand in hand, and pokies are designed. It's like, you know, like they'll say, it's like these machines were made for us, which is awful.
Well, they've been designed, as you know, and I know, by top-notch psychologists. The best brains are designing pokie machines to get bums on seats.
Yeah, but for meth users, it's another level again. That's the thing, isn't it? You know, they're wide awake and buzzing, and I really liked. Sadly, I liked your thing when you said that it creates a super high, and that's no wonder it's such a great thing to do when you're trying to escape from your life. Basically, it's a double hit. So that's all I wanted to say. But thank you. I really appreciate that, and your journey.
Yeah, and I've actually got some answers in relation to that, because new policies are coming out, but I don't know how good they're going to be. So one of the part of the policies that's being proposed is now, and it's going into law as of June the 13th this year, because I'm like you, Denise, I get a little bit on my soapbox, and I want to, we've got to have policies and education driven from the top. We know what works, say. So as of the 15th of June this year, all pubs, and how they're going to regulate this, I don't know, Denise, this is another thing, need to have staff that are fully trained in dealing with gamblers. What does that mean? I don't know. To identify harm by doing regular sweeps of pokie machines at least every 10 minutes. You know, what barmaid or bar is going to do that. They have to report back to their bar manager. But get this one, this is the last proposal, is that pokie machines all need to be hidden from view. Well, that's perfect for a meth gambler, isn't it? They're right out of view. Nana and Granddad aren't going to go in there and see that I've been sitting in front of the pokie machine for 10 years. So the very policies are trying to introduce to reduce harm. You know, I hope, Denise, that policymakers come and speak to you guys directly and go, what actually can we do, instead of policies being driven by people who I don't know if they understand policies. And then going to also, you know, I think a big cohort here is we know that with our Asian communities there is huge risk of gambling, and going to frontline workers that are in the cassette that are working and really getting the information from the people at the bottom of the cliff, not policymakers in Parliament. So I had a wee look, and I don't know if any of these sweeping measures are actually going to reduce harm to a lot of the people and the beautiful work that you're doing at PGF, Denise. I really can't see, you just imagine some little bartender who's working the late shift doing a sweep of the pokie rooms every 10 minutes to somebody who's using meth sitting in a pokie machine.
I just one closing comment. Attended a thank you, Denise. Attended a one of the stakeholder meetings with Sky City Hamilton and the casino here, and they had actually closed their casino from I think 4 o'clock in the morning, and then they reopened it at 10 a.m. and I asked them what was the reason behind closing in those hours between 4 a.m. and reopening at 10 a.m. because in my mind I'm thinking it was to clean it out of the pokie of the meth addicts who were going there up wired at 3 o'clock in the morning looking for that extra stimulus to get that extra high. And you know, of course they didn't really have an answer, but that was just an assumption that came through to me, because this is a discussion that we've been having for a couple of years now, is that we've been alerted that there are gamblers, pokie gamblers that are, you know, presenting for meth in the first instance, and then pokies, gambling. So thank you so much everybody for attending, but especially thank you to you, Julie. Your wealth of experience and knowledge in this space, you know, you've focused a lot around your people-centered and strength-based approach, and you know, there's so much value in having lived experience, and you bring that to this role, and we just have been so privileged to have you present to us today about this kaupapa. And so we thank you, and we thank you for the work that you do with our peoples in the community, and we also thank Odyssey House Christchurch. So nā reira, I'll close us off with karakia, and then we can go about our day. So thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you.
Nei rā te mihi atu kia koe, I te marae kura, kia tātou katoa. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātea, kia māma, te ngākau, te hinengaro, te whaiora, te tinana, ki te ara takatu. Koe ara e rongo whakaeri ake ki runga, haumie hui e, pai ki e.